Hello, my name is Leo. Today I am going to tell everyone the story of a girl who had lived her life as a boy for the past 19 years. Yes, that girl was me. Right from the moment I was born, I was not allowed to live with my true gender. My existence was a lie. I didn't like it at all, but I still had to do it to save my family. It all started before I was even born. My father was once a rich young man living a prosperous life with his older brother. But both my dad and uncle were profligates. They were more than willing to throw tons of money from their father to satisfy their pleasures. My grandfather was disappointed and furious because of this. He disowned both of his sons and kicked them out of his mansion. My uncle found a good job with a stable income not long after that, but my father still struggled with his money. After my father got married and my mother became pregnant with her first child, my grandfather told them that if they had a son, he would support the whole family. My grandfather was an old man. He had always valued men above women, especially when living in a family with a long old-fashioned tradition. The prejudice that men were superior to women had imprinted on his brain, and how unfortunate it was, my mother gave birth to a daughter. In her second pregnancy, she gave birth to a daughter again, and of course in her third one, the result wasn't any better, as I regretfully was brought into the world. After giving birth to my second sister, my family was in a dire situation. Our family finances were in big trouble, and my parents could not raise 3 young children at the same time. Due to that, they decided to deceive my grandfather that they had a son, and from then on, the tragedy of my life began. To avoid being exposed, my parents forced me to change my identity and behave like a boy. They changed my name, my toys, my clothes, to my appearance. I was not allowed to reveal this to anyone, and must always be extra careful when going outside. That was why during my childhood, apart from my 2 sisters, I didn't have any friends. This disguise caused me a lot of trouble when I started school. I always had to wear a chest binder before going to school, hid in the bathroom whenever I changed my clothes to avoid the funny eyes of other boys. Besides, my father told my physics teacher that I had a congenital heart defect and atopic dermatitis, so that I would be spared from attending physical classes. But honestly, the changing room and the toilet were the biggest nightmares for me. To deceive my grandfather, I never had any contact with him. Every year, we visited him once on Christmas and sometimes on particularly important days. And I had to admit, I didn't like those family gatherings at all. Not only having to face the guilt of having to lie to my grandfather, but also having to endure my uncle's family. Although we were relatives, they were extremely mean. My uncle was always deliberately trying to find ways to mock my dad for his incompetence. And his 2 sons, Michael and Jack, always used me as a target for bullying. The only person I was fond of in their family was probably Nolan, the stepson of my uncle's wife, who was a few years older than me. Nolan always looked aloof and eccentric, as if his head was on the clouds. He didn't give a flying duck about anything around him. Totally different from the other 2 brothers who constantly had their noses in other business. Nolan was a much kinder person compared to every member of his family. He was sweet when he talked to me and always had a warm smile. I believed he was a good person. One day, our grandfather took us to his horse ranch. He wanted to show us how our family became rich and prosperous. That was all thanks to racehorse trading. Each of us, he said, had to take one horse that was not tamed and try to ride it. For him, taming a horse was like running a company. It required the leader to be smart and quick on their feet. I chose a horse for myself and was able to climb on his back just after a few minutes of petting him. I was so excited to show off my achievement to my grandfather, but my 2 cousins had decided to startle my horse. They made him bounce up and down uncontrollably, and I was knocked down to the ground. It was a serious and painful fall. My hip was badly injured, and I bled a lot. I was about to call out for help, but then I realized my secret of being disguised as a boy would be exposed if my grandfather took me to the hospital. I clenched my teeth, tried to suppress the pain, then quietly left. I went back to my room, carefully took off my shirt to examine the wound. A sharp pain hit me as I took it off and saw a large cut that was bleeding nonstop. While I was trying to use the towel to stop the bleeding, my door was suddenly opened and Nolan worriedly entered. He panicked when he saw my chest binder as the realization hit him. The boyish Leo he knew was a girl. He even dropped the medical box he was holding out of shock. As I hastily put the shirt back on, Nolan blushed and looked away. He said that he saw me fall, so he just wanted to make sure I was all right. I was scared, so I told him everything, hoping he would keep it a secret for me. Nolan pondered for a while, slowly processed every information I poured on him. I sighed in relief when he finally looked at me with sympathetic and understanding eyes. He told me to rest assured that He confessed to me that his coming here was also due to his mother's arrangements. Nolan never liked his two brothers, just as I did. After that, Nolan helped me take care of my wound and even generously offered his support to me in any way he could. From that day on, Nolan and I became even closer. He helped me to keep my secret from everyone. Romantic feelings started growing between us. We were in love, but nothing could be hidden forever. The secret of my gender and my scandalous love affair with Nolan came out. That day when everyone was asleep, Nolan asked me to come to the back garden of the mansion. When we were kissing, Jack and Michael suddenly appeared. They spotted us and immediately reported to our grandfather. My grandfather was extremely angry. He ordered everyone to his mansion. He criticized my family for deceiving him for years. He called me a con man and spitted cruel words on my face. My head exploded. I was too tired of living my life in lies for a long time. I cried and screamed and poured my heart out about everything I had to go through. I criticized my grandfather for being an unjust and sexist person. I called out the bottomless pit of my parents' greed and the horrible treatment from my uncle's family. I didn't want their money. I just wanted to live true to myself. Enough is enough, I shouted as I left the mansion with Nolan. We decided to live together and vowed to never come back to this terrible family again. 2 months after leaving home, I received a phone call from a distant relative of mine informing me that my grandfather was too weak and he was about to pass away. Even though I hated my family, I still felt remorse in my heart and decided to return. Seeing my grandfather lying helplessly on the hospital bed, all my hatred suddenly went away and was replaced with pity and sadness. I rushed to hug him no matter what. He was still my grandfather and I owed him an apology. He stroked my head weakly with the remainder of his strength and expressed regrets about what I had gone through. He looked at me for what felt like an eternity and whispered the words I never thought I would be able to hear from him in this lifetime. "I love you so much, my granddaughter." He said his final words before closing his eyes. Tears I didn't know I had started streaming down my face as I hugged him for the very last time. A few days after the funeral, I received an envelope from my grandfather's lawyer. He left me a large sum of money to start over. I was deeply moved. With this money, Nolan and I could afford to live a decent life as my grandfather wished for.
My name is Emma. I'm 25 and live in a fairly nice home. Some would call me wealthy, but I don't like to brag. One day I was walking home and a group of boys jumped me. I couldn't defend myself against all of them. They were going to molest me. Luckily, a man that was walking by was able to stop them. He led me to somewhere safe, telling me that his name was Robert. He shared the same sense of humor as me. We quickly became good friends. After many months, our relationship grew to something more. I thought he loved me, but all he was after was my money. On one of my birthdays, he drew a beautiful portrait of me. I had no idea he was able to draw so well. I had that picture hung up on my wall for so long. He proposed to me soon after, and I immediately accepted. I was ecstatic. I thought I was finally getting my happy ending. Sometimes I see a phone number pop up on Robert's phone, but he'd never answer it. I asked him one time why he never answers his phone. He said that it was one of his clients. I knew it was a lie, but I didn't say. A few weeks later, I wanted to surprise Robert for being a great fiancé. I went to his house and hid in a closet until he came home. I heard his footsteps and prepared myself to jump out. Then I heard a woman's voice and froze. They were in the middle of a conversation. One about me. Robert says that he got what he wanted and is about to break up with me. He was using me. I jump out of the closet and throw the wedding ring at his feet. I left that house with tears rolling down my cheeks. I cried as I drove home. My vision was so blurry, I had to pull over my car. I continued crying for I don't know how long. It wasn't until I heard a knock on my car door that I realized I wasn't alone in the parking lot. I wiped my eyes and rolled down my window.
"Hey,"
he said.
"you probably shouldn't be driving in that condition. I can take you home if you'd like."
I wasn't sure about letting a stranger drive my car, but I was also desperate about getting home. He told me his name was Alex and he was a banker. He looked trustworthy enough, so I agreed, still holding my phone if I needed to dial 911. Luckily, he was good to his word and brought me home. Weeks after that, we were still talking and Alex came to check up on me every day. I realized that not all men are like my ex, Robert, and I allow myself to open up. I somehow found love again with Alex. Alex proposed to me months later and we got married. It wasn't long after that I found out I was pregnant. I assumed it was Alex's and he did too. He was overjoyed about a child. One day he was using my phone while I was cooking and called me over. There was worry in his voice. Alex showed me a picture that I'd taken with Robert kissing me on my cheek. I'd forgotten to delete it. I tell Alex about Robert and explain that he has nothing to worry about. My ex was a jerk, and I delete the photo. A few days later, I gave birth to a baby boy. Alex mentions that the baby doesn't resemble him. I think he was worried that our baby wasn't his. 2 years pass, and Alex is still uncertain about our child. I try to tell him that it is definitely his, but he isn't convinced. We get a DNA test to put his concerns to rest. We wait a few weeks for the results. It is Alex's child. We were both relieved. Alex finally stops mentioning the resemblance of our child and we move on with life. It's a fairly normal and boring one, but I wouldn't trade it for the world.